My friends, when we look at the world around us in 2025, we see a moment of change. The world is faster, more connected, and more competitive than ever before. And in the middle of this moment stand two great democracies, the United States of America and the Republic of India. Both proud, both diverse, both with dreams as wide as the horizon. But here is the question that stirs curiosity. Why is India standing up to America now? Why here? Why at this time? It is not because of anger. It is not because of rivalry. It is because India has reached a point where it can no longer be just a follower. It has grown in strength, in confidence, and in vision. And when a nation reaches that point, it does not whisper on the world stage. It speaks with its own voice. So let me ask you this. In a world reshaped by shifting alliances, growing economies, and new technological frontiers, why is India, of all places, choosing now to stand up to the world's oldest superpower? Why stand up? Why here? Why now? This isn't about hostility or friction, and it isn't about confrontation for its own sake. This is about maturity. Consider what maturity looks like on a national scale. A nation that has spent decades reforming, investing and transforming its institutions stands differently on the world stage from a nation still finding its footing. India has walked that path. It's not accidentally or overnight arriving at this moment. It's been building toward it for years, brick by deliberate brick. Earlier this month, Prime Minister Narendra Modi unveiled India's most ambitious tax reform since 2017, slashing goods and services tax rates on essentials and electronics to make life more affordable for millions and to make Indian industry more competitive both at home and abroad. This is more than economic policy, it's identity and independence in policy. Modi wasn't just lowering taxes, he was saying, we won't let external pressures derail our priorities. That move comes amid a trial by fire. Trade tensions with the U.S. have heated up dramatically. The Trump administration imposed steep tariffs, pushing duties on Indian exports as high as 50%. Trade talks scheduled for this month in New Delhi were abruptly canceled. Negotiations to smooth the path have stalled. Instead of an agreement, we've seen diplomatic friction. Some say it's coercion. Others say it's testing limits. But what matters more is how India responded, rather than retreating. Prime Minister Modi addressed the nation from the Red Fort on Independence Day. He reaffirmed India's commitment to self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, and declared he would willingly pay a very heavy price to defend Indian farmers and domestic producers. Make no mistake, this isn't defiance for its own sake. It's a recalibration of power. India is signaling that it will not be pushed into policies that compromise its own long-term interests. It's not rejecting the partnership. It's asking for one based on mutual respect and confidence. The Indian Foreign Ministry reaffirmed that while trade may be a flashpoint, strategic cooperation continues. U.S. defense procurements remain on track, and talks on defense remain alive even amid the economic turbulence. This, my friends, is not hostility. This is maturity. We have seen it before in other democracies. Moments when nations learned the difference between being dependent and being respected, when they chose to be masters of their fate rather than subjects of global whims. India, with its billion dreams and its booming democracy, has earned that moment. Look at the strategic landscape. Friendships and alliances still matter, but they must now be built on equality, not necessity. Underneath this shift lies a deeper transformation. India is no longer just responding to the world. It is helping to define it. The work continues beyond trade. Earlier this year, Prime Minister Modi traveled to the United States to meet President Trump. The two leaders launched an ambitious Mission 500, a shared vision to push bilateral trade to 500. They also signed a long-term framework for defense cooperation, marking the major defense partnership in the 21st century. Those were not just agreements. They were demonstrations of partnership and of India's rising confidence as an equal player. Yes, the relationship has its disagreements, but that's maturity too. It means continuing to work together on security, space, innovation, climate, even when the trade table grows tense. Consider also how India and the U.S. have deepened technological cooperation, not as overlord and subject, but as partners. Through the initiative on critical and emerging technology, I see India and America are collaborating on AI, quantum computing, semiconductors, and wireless tech. This is not charity or dependence, it's co-creation. Semiconductors for national security, fabricated on Indian soil with U.S. support called Bharat Semifab, are expected to be working It speaks to a maturity of conception and ambition. Defense ties have grown too. In April, the joint military exercise Tiger Triumph showcased India and U.S. Marines conducting amphibious landings and coordinating rapid medical response in military cooperation, operational readiness, and trust. Coming up this September, the year's UWS will be hosted by the U.S. in Alaska, bringing hundreds of Indian troops to train in complex high-altitude and Arctic conditions. These are not perfunctory drills. They are investments in interoperability, mutual trust, and shared security. This is not Asia disconnecting from America. It's Asia, India in particular, engaging from a position. This maturation is not happening in a vacuum. In Washington, a quiet yet powerful consensus remains. India matters. Its democratic values, its strategic footprint, its sheer scale, they make India indispensable for a free and open Indo-Pacific. Strategic documents continue to name India as a major defense partner and a driving force within Quad, a net security provider in South Asia, and a linchpin of Indo-Pacific stability. So stand up isn't stand off. It's stand with confidence. And for India, the time is now. Because when you've built the institutions, strengthened the economy, matured your democracy, and expanded your strategic reach, you don't just follow the global current. You help steer it. India is not merely reacting to pressure from the world's oldest democracy. India is asserting its right to shape its own trajectory while still walking shoulder to shoulder with partners who share its values. That is the mark of maturity. That is why, at this moment, India stands up not to push others aside, but to stand on its own, ready to contribute to a world that's more balanced, more respectful, more secure. Let me take you on a journey, not just through time, but through transformation. When India opened its doors to the world in the early 1990s, it faced a crisis that threatened its economic future. A balance of payments emergency loomed large, and the nation stood at a crossroads. But it chose the road of reform, innovation, and resilience. Economic policies were reimagined. India moved from restrictive barriers to liberalization, from closed markets to global integration. The government dismantled the bureaucratic license, Raj, opened equity markets, encouraged foreign investment, and repealed steep tariffs that held industry back. These decisions did more than stabilize the economy. They signaled a change in mindset, and they lit a spark that would fuel decades of growth. From those early reforms sprang a wave. The 1990s and early 2000s saw India embracing the digital revolution. Telecom networks proliferated, tech parks multiplied, and a generation of engineering graduates found pathways to success in coding, software development, and services that connected Mumbai to Silicon Valley and Bangalore to Berlin. India began to emerge not merely as a participant in the global economy, but as a provider of innovative solutions. In the years that followed, India's transformation took shape across sectors: manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, space, infrastructure, each area holding its own milestone. Indian companies began to deliver not just for domestic need, but for global demand. Indian-made vaccines, essential medicines, and generics became lifelines for many countries. Satellites launched from Indian soil served both domestic purposes and became a testament to technological confidence. And as the internet took hold, digital payment systems, e-commerce platforms, and startup incubators began multiplying across towns and cities. Fast forward to the mid-2020s, and the numbers tell a story that's nothing short of remarkable. India's nominal GDP is projected to reach around $4.19 trillion by 2025, earning it the rank of the fourth largest economy in the world, overtaking Japan in that year. In terms of purchasing power parity, India sits even higher, climbing to the third place globally, reflecting the real goods, services, and capabilities being deployed across its vast population. Growth remains the nation's hallmark. The International Monetary Fund projects India's growth at around 6.2 to 6.5% in 2025 and 2026, a headwinds beating rate that stands out even as the global economy slows. Morgan Stanley reinforces that view, forecasting sustained expansion and naming India among the fastest growing major economies. It's a conclusion echoed by government leaders. Just recently, Finance Minister Piyush Goyal reminded the world that while some labeled India a dead economy, the IMF projects India's growth at 6.4%, well ahead of the U.S.'s pace of around 2%. Behind these aggregate figures are stories of transformation. Take, for example, a moment in the final months of fiscal year 2025. India's economy accelerated unexpectedly, reaching a stunning 7.4% growth rate in Q4, boosting the full-year performance to around. That kind of late-ride momentum wasn't just statistical. It reflected the resilience of supply chains, rural consumption, and fiscal stimulus that buoyed confidence. The consumer markets are powering that growth. Morgan Stanley now sees India becoming the largest consumer market in the world in due course, driven by rising incomes, urbanization, and expanding digital access. This rise is not just in the cities or among the elite. It reaches the heartland, the countryside, the small towns, making India not just a growing economy, but a more inclusive one. Over the past several decades, poverty has declined sharply, and hundreds of millions have moved into India's growing middle class. Yet, inequality remains a challenge to be met with renewed commitment. Consider the population dynamics. India's median age is significantly lower than that of most major economies, giving it a demographic advantage, a young, eager workforce fueling both productivity and consumption. But a youth dividend is not automatic. It must be supported with education, opportunity, healthcare, and infrastructure. That's why investment in rural banking, roads, digital connectivity, and jobs have been central to recent budgets and policy packages. Across states, we see this story mirrored. States like Madhya Pradesh have launched ambitious industrial investment summits targeting massive job creation projects in energy, expressways, and social empowerment programs such as Yuva Shakti and Nari Shakti are combining economic growth with human resilience. Karnataka, one of India's most dynamic states, is growing at over 10% annually, with services driving more than two-thirds of its economy. None of this happened without intent. The governments of different hues built upon that 1991 liberalization, pushing frameworks like goods and services tax, GST, for tax simplification, digital infrastructure like Aadhaar, startup ecosystem, manufacturing zones, and renewable energy investment. In 2025, Prime Minister Modi implemented the most significant GST revision since 2017, lowering tax rates on essentials and electronics, making life more affordable, and putting Indian products ahead. Analysts say this move could boost GDP by 0.6 percentage points annually. A reminder that policy choices matter. This is not incidental growth. It is the result of decades of freedom from policy inertia, institutional strengthening, digital architecture, and renewed confidence. A trillion-dollar services sector, cutting-edge tech hubs, defense manufacturing, solar assembly lines, and biotech labs, all thriving inside India's boundaries for India and for the world. So when we ask, why is India standing up today? Why here and why now? It is because this rise has been deliberate, cumulative, resilient. India has built the capacity to affirm its independence without pushing itself away from partnership. Instead, it arrives at the global stage not as a supplicant, but as a contender with achievements, assets, and ambition. From the opening of capital markets in the early 1990s to the Indian tech revolution, from a $266 billion GDP in 1991 to over $4 trillion today, from subsistence to self-reliance, India's narrative is not one of chance, but of choice. And that foundational journey is what makes this moment possible. It allows India to raise its voice, not in defiance, but in dignity. It allows India to engage, not in dependence, but in deliberation. Because a nation that has walked the road of reform, built institutions, lifted lives, and grown with conviction, that nation speaks differently. That nation stands differently. That nation shows up anchored in history, confident in its present, and hopeful about its future. That is India's rise. My friends, when we talk about India's remarkable rise, we also have to talk about the choices it faces as a mature nation, because a country that grows in power must also grow in responsibility and in clarity about what it wants from the world. And this is where we begin to see a new chapter in the story of India and the United States. It is a chapter filled not with hostility, not with rivalry for rivalry's sake, but with differences born out of perspective, geography, and national priority. These differences are not weaknesses in the partnership. They are signs of its maturity. Let's begin with geography. The United States is blessed by two oceans. It looks outward across the Atlantic and the Pacific. Its vision is global. Its reach stretches from Europe to the Middle East to East Asia. For generations, America has seen its role as one of projecting influence far from its shores, defending allies across continents, shaping the rules of the international system. India's experience is different. It is a continental power rooted in South Asia. It has a long land border with China, one of the world's most formidable nations. To the west lies Pakistan, a rival with a complex history. To the east are Bangladesh and Myanmar, countries tied to India by migration, trade, and security concerns. And all around lies the Indian Ocean, through which the lifeblood of global trade flows. For India, geography is not about distant theaters. It is about an immediate neighborhood that must be managed every single day. It is about terrorism that crosses borders, disputes that flare in the Himalayas, trade routes that stretch from the Gulf to the Straits of Malacca. India's foreign policy begins not with the idea of projecting power everywhere, but with securing its home and shaping the region it calls its own. Now let's look at China. For Washington, China has become the defining rival of the 21st century, a competitor in technology, in economics, in military power, a challenge to American leadership across the globe. For India, the picture is far more complicated. On one hand, there are border tensions. We all remember the clashes in Ladakh, the standoffs along the line of actual control, the sense of mistrust that lingers. On the other hand, there is trade. China remains one of India's largest commercial partners. Indian factories rely on Chinese components. Indian markets import Chinese goods. Severing those ties would come at a steep cost. So India must navigate a relationship that is part rivalry, part necessity, and entirely inescapable. Where the United States sees decoupling, India sees careful balance. Where America chooses confrontation in some areas, India often chooses calibration. That difference is not weakness. It is realism born of geography and economics. Consider the military. America has built a network of bases across the world. From Germany to Japan, from South Korea to the Persian Gulf, the U.S. military is present in dozens of nations. Its Navy sails every ocean. Its Air Force operates from every continent. America projects power as a matter of strategy. India, by contrast, has chosen restraint. Its military is strong, professional, and growing, but its focus is first on defense of borders, defense of sovereignty, defense of the Indian Ocean. India has resisted forming formal military alliances, even with close partners like the United States. Why? Because of a long tradition of non-alignment. A belief that India must keep its independence in decision-making, that it must never outsource its choices to another power, no matter how friendly. So even as India and the U.S. deepen cooperation through joint exercises, arms purchases, intelligence sharing, India stops short of a binding alliance. That is not hesitation, it is principle. A principle rooted in history and a desire never to surrender autonomy. Let's turn to energy. For the United States, energy policy is often shaped by strategy, by the desire to use sanctions, to isolate adversaries, to align markets with foreign policy. For India, energy policy is shaped by something closer to home, the needs of its people. India is a country of more than 1 billion. It is still industrializing, still urbanizing, still lifting millions into the middle class. Affordable fuel and electricity are not luxuries, they are necessities for growth. So when oil prices rise, when sanctions are imposed on nations like Russia or Iran, India has sometimes chosen to keep buying. It has continued to import discounted Russian crude. It has maintained ties to Iranian suppliers, not to undermine America's goals, but to protect its own. Because for India, keeping energy affordable is not just policy, it is survival. It is the ability to run factories, to move goods, to power homes. And so once again, we see the difference. Where America measures compliance in terms of strategy, India measures it in terms of livelihood. Now let's consider technology. America sees technology as the next great battleground. Who controls 5G networks? Who dominates artificial intelligence? Who builds semiconductors? These are strategic questions. America frames them in terms of security and rivalry. India agrees on the importance of security, but India also sees something else. For a nation of more than 1 billion, technology is not just about control. It is about access. It is about whether a farmer in Bihar can use digital payments, whether a student in Kerala can learn online, whether a small business in Gujarat can sell its goods to the world. India's priority is affordability, inclusivity, and innovation at scale. That is why it has built systems like UPI, why it has invested in domestic startups, why it partners not only with America, but with Europe, Japan, and others. Because India's measure of success is not simply who dominates the high ground of strategy. It is who can deliver for the many, not just the few. And finally, global institutions. The United States has long been the architect of the system we live in. The United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, all bear the imprint of American power. America has often preferred to lead, to set the rules, to carry the burden. India has a different perspective. It does not reject these institutions. It participates, it contributes, but it also calls for reform. It asks, why is the UN Security Council still shaped by the realities of night? Why are emerging economies underrepresented in the IMF? Why does the World Bank not reflect today's balance of power? India presses for a multipolar order, for structures that reflect the world as it is, not as it was. This is not defiance. It is democracy writ large, the belief that voices should be heard in proportion to their weight in today's world. So, yes, there are differences in geography, in how we see China, in the role of the military, in energy priorities, in the philosophy of technology, in the design of institutions. But let us be absolutely clear. These differences do not mean India is anti-American. Far from it. They mean that India is pro-India. It is standing for its own interests, its own people, its own vision of the future. It is not walking away from partnership. It is redefining partnership. It is saying, we will work with you, but we will do so as equal. We will cooperate where our interests align, and we will reserve the right to differ where they do not. That is not a weakness in our friendship. It is the strength of it, because true partnership is not about one side following the other. It is about both sides walking together with respect. And so, my friends, as we look at this moment in history, let us not mistake difference for division. India and America will not agree on every issue. No two democracies ever do. But both share something deeper, a commitment to freedom, to opportunity, to dignity. Both believe in the promise of democracy. And when those values guide us, differences become manageable. They become part of the conversation, not the end of it. That is the lesson of maturity. That is what it means for India to rise and stand tall, not against America, but alongside America with its own voice, its own choices, its own confidence. And that is how two great democracies can shape a future together, not by erasing their differences, but by respecting them, not by imposing one vision, but by building a shared one, a vision of a world that is freer, fairer, and more secure. Because in the end, India's story is not about standing apart. It is about standing with dignity, standing with independence, standing with a partner who is willing to listen as much as it leads. That is how this relationship will grow. That is how it will endure. And that is how it will help shape the 20th. My friends, we have spoken about India's rise, and we have spoken about the ways in which its vision sometimes differs from that of the United States. But let us take a step back and look at the bigger picture, the world in which these choices are being made. Because the truth is, this moment in history is not just about two nations. It is about the very shape of the international system. For much of the last century, we lived in a world where power was concentrated in one place, where America stood at the center as the single superpower. But today, we live in something different. We live in a multipolar world. That phrase, multipolar world, may sound like the language of policy experts, but let's make it plain. It means that influence is no longer held by one capital or even two. It means that economic power, technological leadership, and political authority are now spread across many nations, many regions, many centers of gravity. It means that no country, not even the United States, can dictate terms to the rest of the world as easily as before. That is not a decline, it is a reflection of reality. And in that reality, India has found opportunity. Think about what it means to live in a multipolar order. In the old days, a nation might have felt it had to choose East or West, America or the Soviet Union, one bloc or another. But in today's world, India does not have to choose. Instead, it can build relationships on its own terms with many partners across many issues. This is what some call multi-alignment. India does not belong to one camp. It belongs to itself. And because of that, it has the freedom to partner with the United States on defense, with the European Union on trade, with Japan on technology, with Russia on energy, with Africa on agriculture. It has the ability to cooperate with multiple nations at once, issue by issue, without being trapped by ideology or by fear. This is not indecision. It is not fence-sitting. It is a deliberate strategy of independence. And it reflects confidence, because only a nation that knows its own strength can afford to engage with everyone while bowing to no one. Look at defense. India's security partnerships today are more diverse than ever before. It buys fighter jets from France, naval systems from the United States, missile defense from Israel, and energy-related military technology from Russia. It conducts joint exercises with Australia and Japan, builds cooperative frameworks with Europe, and explores new arrangements with Southeast Asia. This is not dependence on one source. This is diversification. It ensures that no single supplier can hold India hostage, that no single partner can dictate terms. It gives India leverage, flexibility, and resilience. And it shows the world that India is serious about being a security provider, not just a security consumer. Now think about soft power, the quiet influence that flows not from armies or treaties, but from people, culture, and connection. India has one of the largest diasporas in the world, spread across the continent. Indian doctors in the Middle East, Indian engineers in Silicon Valley, Indian entrepreneurs in Africa, Indian students in Europe. These are not just individuals chasing opportunity. They are bridges linking India to the wider world. They are informal ambassadors, shaping perceptions, opening doors, and building trust. And when a Prime Minister of India steps onto a stage in New York or Sydney or Nairobi, the cheers of the diaspora remind us that India's influence is not confined to its border. It lives in communities around the globe. So when India stands up on the world stage today, it is not walking away from the United States. It is walking into the world with confidence. That is the soundbite. But behind that soundbite is a profound truth. India's voice is louder because the world itself has changed. The United States remains powerful, remains vital, remains a friend. But it is no longer the only pole around which the globe revolves. Europe is a center. China is a center. Africa, with its demographic surge, is emerging as a center. Latin America is finding its voice. Southeast Asia is rising. And in that polyphony of voices, India is becoming a conductor, weaving its own melody into the chorus. This new order has implications. It means that no nation can solve global problems alone. Climate change, pandemics, energy security, artificial intelligence, these are challenges that ignore borders. They require cooperation across many nations. And India, with its size, its economy, its democracy, has a critical role to play. It has joined the International Solar Alliance to push renewable energy. It has worked with the Quad to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open. It has engaged in BRICS to represent the voice of the global South. It has joined hands with Europe on climate and digital governance. It has deepened ties with Africa on development. This is multi-alignment in action, not fragmentation, but engagement on multiple fronts for multiple goals. And let me say this, for America, this should not be seen as a threat. It should be seen as an opportunity. Because when India engages the world on its own terms, it is not weakening partnership, it is strengthening, it is bringing credibility, legitimacy, and balance to global